My name is Emily, and I'm 17 years old. It all started on a chilly Saturday night when my parents went out for a dinner party, and my older sister, Jessica, went to celebrate her boyfriend's birthday. I was left alone in the house, something that didn't really bother me since I was used to it. But that night, something was different, something that still sends shivers down my spine whenever I think about it. After they left, I decided to do what any teenager would: settle down with a good horror movie. I made myself some popcorn, dimmed the lights, and grabbed a blanket to snuggle under on the couch. The movie I chose was one of those classic slasher films. You know, the kind where the killer is lurking in the shadows, waiting to strike. It was one of those nights where the wind howled outside and the trees tapped against the windows like skeletal fingers. Perfect atmosphere for a scary movie, or so I thought. As the movie played, I became more and more engrossed in the plot, my eyes glued to the screen. The tension was building, and I found myself clutching the blanket tighter, my heart racing with each suspenseful scene. I was so focused that I didn't even notice when the room temperature dropped, and the air grew unnervingly still. It wasn't until the killer in the movie struck his first victim that I heard it, a soft creak coming from upstairs. At first, I brushed it off as the house settling. After all, old houses make noises, right? But then it happened again, louder this time, like someone was walking across the floorboards in the room above me. My heart skipped a beat, and I muted the TV, straining to hear any other sounds. For a moment, there was nothing, just the faint hum of the refrigerator and the sound of my own breathing. Then, the creaking started again, moving slowly, deliberately, across the ceiling. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, maybe a draft, or the house settling as I initially thought. But deep down, I knew something was off. The creaks were too rhythmic, too purposeful, as if someone was pacing back and forth. I told myself not to be silly, to calm down and finish the movie, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone in the house. Taking a deep breath, I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, deciding to check upstairs just to put my mind at ease. I slowly made my way up the stairs, each step creaking under my weight. The hallway was dark, the only light coming from the faint glow of the streetlights outside. I paused at the top of the stairs, listening intently. The house was silent again, but the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. I walked towards my room first, the source of the creaking sounds. I pushed the door open with trembling hands, half expecting to see someone standing in the middle of the room. But it was empty, just as I had left it. My bed was unmade, my clothes strewn across the floor, and the window was slightly ajar, letting in a cool breeze. I walked over and shut it, telling myself that was the source of the noise. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I checked Jessica's room next, then my parents' room, and finally the bathroom. All empty, all quiet. But the unease wouldn't leave me. As I walked back downstairs, I heard it again, a soft, almost imperceptible whisper coming from behind me. I spun around, my heart pounding in my chest, but there was nothing there. Just the empty hallway and the closed doors. I rushed back to the living room, my nerves frayed, and turned the TV back on, trying to drown out the eerie silence with the sounds of the movie. But the feeling of being watched persisted, gnawing at me like a cold, dark presence lurking just out of sight. I pulled the blanket tighter around me, trying to focus on the movie, but every creak of the house, every rustle of the wind outside, set my nerves on edge. Then, as the movie reached its climax, the power went out. The room was plunged into darkness, and the TV flickered off, leaving me in complete silence. My heart raced, and I fumbled for my phone, the small beam of light doing little to chase away the overwhelming darkness. The house was silent, but I could feel it. Something was there with me, watching me, waiting. I tried to call my parents, but the call wouldn't go through. The signal was gone, just like the power. Panic set in, and I decided to wait it out in my room, where I could lock the door and maybe feel a little safer. I sprinted upstairs, not caring about the noise I was making, and slammed the door shut behind me. I locked it and backed away, my heart hammering in my chest. I sat on my bed, the blankets pulled up to my chin, my phone clutched in my hand. I didn't know what to do, whether to stay put or try to leave the house. But something told me that leaving would be worse, that whatever was out there was waiting for me to make that move. So I stayed, listening to the silence, my eyes darting around the room, half expecting something to leap out at me from the shadows. Then I heard it again, the whisper. This time it was right outside my door, a soft, chilling voice that sent a wave of terror through me. I froze, my breath catching in my throat, as the doorknob slowly began to turn. It couldn't move, couldn't scream, as the door creaked open, revealing the dark hallway beyond. The figure stood there, a shadowy silhouette, its eyes glowing in the darkness, watching me. I don't remember what happened next. The next thing I knew, my parents were waking me up, concerned looks on their faces. Power was back on, the house was warm again, and everything seemed normal. But I knew it wasn't. Something had happened that night, something I couldn't explain. Jessica thought I was just freaked out from the horror movie, but I knew it was more than that. The whispers, creaking footsteps, the figure at my door, I can't forget them. I don't know what it was, but I know it's still out there, waiting for the next time I'm alone. And that's why I'll never watch another horror movie alone again. Hi, my name is Ryan, and I'm 17 years old. Last summer, my cousins came to visit me during the holidays, and we all stayed at my family's lake house. It was supposed to be a fun getaway, just the four of us hanging out, swimming and roasting marshmallows by the fire. But what was meant to be a carefree week turned into a nightmare that none of us will ever forget. My cousins, Matt, Sophie, and Ethan, arrived on a bright, sunny afternoon. We spent the first few days doing all the usual summer stuff, fishing, hiking, and playing games. The lake house was tucked away in a quiet wooded area, far from the nearest town. It was the perfect place for a relaxing holiday, or so we thought. One evening, after a long day of swimming, we were sitting around the fire pit, telling ghost stories. The sun had set, and the only light came from the flickering flames and the faint glow of the full moon. The air was thick with the smell of smoke and pine, and the night was eerily still. As the stories went on, each one more terrifying than the last, we laughed it off, trying to outdo each other with the scariest tales we could think of. But then, Sophie brought up something that caught us all off guard. "You know," she began, her voice low, "there's a local legend about this lake." We all leaned in closer, curious to hear more. "They say that years ago, a family drowned here. Their boat capsized in a storm, and none of them made it out. Some people say their spirits still haunt the lake, especially at night." Matt scoffed, trying to play it cool. "Yeah, right, just another campfire story." But Ethan, the youngest of us, looked uneasy. "Do you think it's true?" I shrugged, not wanting to admit that the story had given me the creeps. "Probably just a legend." After that, we decided to call it a night, packed up the marshmallows, and doused the fire, heading inside the lake house. The place was old, with creaky wooden floors and doors that didn't quite fit their frames. It had been in our family for generations, and while it was charming during the day, at night it took on a different, more sinister feel. We all got ready for bed, the eerie story lingering in our minds. I was sharing a room with Matt, while Sophie and Ethan had their own rooms down the hall. As I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had settled over me. The house was silent, save for the occasional creak or groan from the old wood. Sometime after midnight, I was jolted awake by a loud bang. I sat up, heart pounding, and looked over at Matt, who was still sound asleep. I waited, listening intently. The noise didn't come again. I told myself it was just the house settling and tried to go back to sleep. But then I heard it. Soft whispers, like a conversation just out of earshot. I strained to listen, trying to make out the words. They were too faint. I got out of bed and quietly opened the door, stepping into the dark hallway. The whispers seemed to be coming from downstairs, near the living room. My curiosity got the better of me, and I tiptoed down the stairs, careful not to wake anyone. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, the whispers suddenly stopped. The living room was empty, and the only light came from the moon shining through the windows. I stood there for a moment, trying to convince myself that it was all in my head. But then I saw it, a shadow moving across the wall, even though there was nothing in the room that could have cast it. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The shadow seemed to move with a mind of its own, shifting and stretching across the wall. I took a step back, and the floor creaked beneath me. The shadow stopped moving, as if it had heard me. Then slowly it began to turn, as if it was looking right at me. Panic surged through me, and I turned and ran back up the stairs, taking them two at a time. I burst into the room, slamming the door behind me and waking Matt in the process. "What the hell, Ryan?" he muttered groggily, sitting up in bed. There's something downstairs," I whispered, my voice trembling. Matt stared at me, trying to gauge if I was serious. But one look at my face told him I wasn't joking. He got out of bed and grabbed the baseball bat we had brought for a game earlier that day. "Stay here," he said, heading for the door. "No way," I protested. "I'm coming with you." We crept back down the stairs together, Matt gripping the bat tightly. But when we reached the living room, everything was as it should be. No shadows, no whispers, nothing. Just the stillness of the night. Matt shook his head. "You must have been dreaming, man." I wanted to believe him, but deep down, I knew what I had seen. We went back upstairs, and I tried to shake off the feeling of dread that clung to me. Sleep didn't come easily. The next day, I didn't mention the incident to Sophie or Ethan. I didn't want to scare them, especially since we still had a few days left at the lake house. But as the day wore on, I noticed that I wasn't the only one feeling uneasy. Sophie seemed jumpy, and Ethan kept glancing nervously at the windows. That night, as we sat around the dinner table, Sophie finally spoke up. "Did anyone else hear strange noises last night?" My heart skipped a beat. "What kind of noises?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Whispers," she said quietly, and something moving around." Ethan nodded, his face pale. "I heard it too. It sounded like someone walking around outside my room." Matt and I exchanged a glance, and I could tell he was starting to believe that something wasn't right. That night, we all decided to sleep in the same room. We pushed the beds together and kept the lights on, hoping that the company would ward off whatever was haunting the house. But the whispers came back, louder this time, and closer. Sounded like they were right outside the door. We huddled together, too scared to move. The door creaked open slowly, and we all held our breath, waiting for whatever was out there to show itself. But nothing came. The whispers stopped, and the door remained open, leading into the pitch-black hallway. "Maybe we should leave," Sophie whispered, her voice shaking. "We can't," Matt said. "It's the middle of the night, and the nearest town is miles away." We spent the rest of the night wide awake, jumping at every little noise. When morning finally came, we packed our things and left the lake house as fast as we could. None of us wanted to spend another night there. When we got back home, we told our parents about what had happened. They dismissed it as our imaginations running wild, fueled by ghost stories and the isolation of the lake house. But we knew better. Something had been there with us, something that didn't want us in its home. We never went back to the lake house after that. My parents eventually sold it, and I heard that the new owners tore it down to build a new, modern cabin. But I wonder if whatever haunted that place is still there, waiting for its next unsuspecting visitors. Even now, years later, I still get chills thinking about that night. And sometimes, when I'm lying in bed in the middle of the night, I think I can hear those same whispers, just beyond the edge of sleep. Hi, my name is Mark, and I'm 22 years old. But this story begins when I was just 12, on a night that still haunts me to this day. It was the night I visited a so-called haunted house with a couple of friends from school. You know, the kind of place that's supposed to be just a bunch of cheesy scares and fake ghosts? But what happened after that visit changed my life in ways I never could have imagined. It was a Friday night in late October, and my friends and I had heard about this old, decrepit house at the edge of town. Rumors circulated about how it was once owned by a man who had mysteriously disappeared decades ago, leaving the house to rot. People said it was haunted, but to a group of 12-year-old boys, it sounded like a fun place to explore. We decided to go there after school, just before it got dark. The house looked exactly as you'd imagine a haunted house would. Tall, booming, with broken windows and ivy crawling up the sides. The door creaked ominously as we pushed it open, and the inside was filled with dust and the smell of decay. We spent a couple of hours wandering around, daring each other to go into different rooms, trying to scare each other with ghost stories we made up on the spot. Nothing happened while we were there. Nothing that felt out of the ordinary. Police. But when we finally left, I had this weird feeling like someone or something was watching us. I shrugged it off, though, thinking it was just my imagination running wild after hearing all those ghost stories. The next day, a Saturday, I was home alone. My parents had gone out of town for the weekend, and my older sister was staying at a friend's house. It wasn't the first time I'd been alone, but for some reason, that day felt different. The house was unusually quiet, kind of silence that makes you hyper-aware of every little sound. I spent the day doing what any 12-year-old would do, playing video games, watching TV, and eating way too much junk food. But as the sun began to set, that uneasy feeling from the night before started creeping back. It was like a weight in the pit of my stomach that I couldn't shake. Around 8 p.m., I decided to watch a movie to distract myself. I picked a light-hearted comedy, something that wouldn't freak me out, but halfway through, the TV screen flickered and then went black. I tried turning it off and on again, but it wouldn't work. Frustrated, I gave up and decided to head to bed early. As I made my way upstairs, I heard it. Faint, barely audible creaking sound, like someone was walking across the floorboards in the living room. I froze, listening intently. The sound stopped as suddenly as it had started. My heart was pounding in my chest, but I convinced myself it was nothing. Maybe the house settling or a draft blowing through the old windows. I went to bed, pulling the covers over my head like a shield, trying to ignore the growing sense of dread in my gut. I must have fallen asleep at some point, but I woke up in the middle of the night, the sound of soft whisper. It was as if someone was standing right outside my bedroom door, murmuring in a low, almost inaudible voice. I held my breath, straining to hear what was being said, but I couldn't make out the words. My whole body was paralyzed with fear. I didn't dare move, didn't dare even breathe too loudly, as the whispers continued for what felt like an eternity. Then, as suddenly as they had started, they stopped. I lay there in the dark, every muscle in my body tensed, listening for any other sound. But the house had returned to its eerie silence. I stayed awake until the first light of dawn peeked through my curtains, too terrified to move. The next day, I tried to tell myself that it had all been a bad dream, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. Something had followed me home from that haunted house, and it wasn't done with me yet. Over the next few weeks, strange things began happening around the house. Objects would move on their own. Nothing big, just little things like a book being out of place or a picture frame tilted at an odd angle. I'd hear footsteps in the middle of the night, soft but unmistakable. And once, I even caught a glimpse of a shadowy figure standing at the end of the hallway, watching me. Tried telling my parents, but they just brushed it off as my overactive imagination. "It's just a phase," they said. "You'll grow out of it." But I knew what I was experiencing was real. It was getting worse. One night, about a month after the visit to the haunted house, I woke up to the feeling of someone sitting on the edge of my bed. I opened my eyes, and there, in the dim light of my nightstand lamp, I saw the faint outline of a figure. It was just sitting there, unmoving, watching me. I couldn't see its face, but I could feel its presence. Cold, malevolent energy that made my skin crawl. I wanted to scream, to run, but I couldn't move. I was frozen in place, trapped in my own bed by this thing. It leaned in closer, and I could feel the temperature in the room drop. The air around me became thick, suffocating. Couldn't breathe, couldn't think. All I could do was stare at this shadowy figure as it hovered over me. Then, just as quickly as it had appeared, it was gone. The room returned to normal. The oppressive weight lifted, and I could move again. I sat up, gasping for air, my heart racing. I looked around, but there was no sign of the figure. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next morning I told my parents again, but they were still dismissive. "You're just having nightmares," they said. "It's all in your head." But it wasn't in my head. I knew that something had followed me home, something that was getting stronger, more real with each passing day. For years after that, the strange occurrences continued. I'd hear footsteps, see shadows moving in the corner of my eye, feel that cold, suffocating presence late at night. But as I got older, it seemed to happen less and less. By the time I was 18, it had mostly stopped. I moved out for college, and for a while I thought I was finally free of whatever had been haunting me. But every now and then, I'd get that same feeling, like something was watching me, waiting for the right moment to make itself known again. Now at 22, I've tried to put it all behind me, but there are nights when I can still feel it, like it's just lurking in the shadows, waiting. I don't know if it's ever really gone, or if it's just biding its time. But one thing's for sure. I'll never forget that night I visited the haunted house, and the thing that followed me home. So, if you ever come across an old abandoned house at the edge of town, be careful. You never know what might be waiting inside, and you never know what might decide to follow you home.